Theme parks spend billions making you feel safe. The cue music, the cheerful staff, the safety briefing you've heard so many times you tune it out. All of it is designed to put you at ease before they strap you into something that will hurl you at highway speed or drop you from a height that would be illegal anywhere else. Most of the time it works. But these 7 cases expose what happens when the engineering fails, when the rules are ignored, or when the people responsible for keeping you alive simply didn't bother. Case 1. The ride that killed its designer's dream. Verrückt wasn't built like other water slides. It was built like a bet. The name means crazy in German, and when Schlitterbahn Kansas City opened it in 2014, it was marketed as the world's tallest water slide, 168 feet, a near vertical plunge, and a second hill that sent riders airborne through a tunnel of netting before depositing them at the bottom. The park leaned hard into the record. The spectacle was the point. On August 7, 2016, Schlitterbahn hosted a special event, Schlitterbahn Day, for Kansas state lawmakers and their families. Among the attendees was Scott Schwab, a Kansas state representative, who brought his family. His son, Caleb Thomas Schwab, was 10 years old. They rode Verrückt together, as families do on a summer afternoon at a water park. Caleb was seated in the front of the 3-person raft, with 2 adult women behind him. The raft dropped down the first hill, hit speeds that pinned riders into the floor under G-forces, then shot upward toward the second hill, a rise enclosed by a safety net suspended from a steel frame overhead. The net was there to catch any raft that might go airborne. It was, in theory, the safeguard. The raft went airborne. It lifted off the slide surface entirely and drove into the overhead frame and netting. Caleb, the smallest and lightest rider in the front position, was thrown upward into the structure. The impact decapitated him. The 2 women behind him were thrown forward and suffered severe facial injuries: broken jaw, broken facial bones, lacerations. The raft came back down covered in blood. Lifeguards and staff reached the slide after a 911 call. Caleb was pronounced dead at the scene. His injuries left no ambiguity. Witnesses, other riders and park employees, stood in shock at what they had seen. The investigation revealed that Verrückt had never been engineered through standard industry calculations. It had been built by trial and error, prioritizing height and spectacle over structural safety. At least a dozen riders had previously been violently slammed into the netting, suffering injuries. Those reports were not acted on. The overhead net, intended as a safety measure, had become a killing surface once the raft design proved capable of going airborne. Schlitterbahn's Kansas City Park was closed and eventually shuttered. A grand jury indicted the park and operations director Tyler Miles on charges including involuntary manslaughter and aggravated child endangerment, alleging that prior injury reports had been deliberately ignored and investigators misled. The criminal charges were ultimately dismissed on evidentiary grounds. Civil settlements with the Schwab family reportedly reached many millions of dollars. Prosecutors had described the slide's development as a slapdash approach that put thrills over safety. A former lifeguard told media he had himself been violently thrown around on Verrückt and considered it dangerous long before August 7, 2016. Verrückt was dismantled. The world's tallest water slide no longer exists. Case 2. She said the bar wasn't locked. Rosie Esparza, 52, was not a thrill-seeker in the way the word usually implies. She was a mother on a family day out at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, visiting with her son and daughter-in-law on July 19, 2013. Texas Giant was the marquee coaster. 14 stories tall, steep drops, significant airtime. The kind of ride that's been running for years without incident. She boarded and sat in the row directly behind her son. Before the train dispatched, Rosie reportedly told someone nearby that her lap bar did not feel secure. That detail, which emerged through witness accounts and the family's lawsuit, is the central fact of everything that followed. Whether it was said to a fellow rider or to a staff member, and whether anyone acted on it, became the focus of the legal proceedings. The train was dispatched regardless. During the ride, her daughter-in-law later told investigators she could hear Rosie calling out that she was coming out of her seat. On a major drop, witnesses saw her legs rise above the restraint level, the physical sign that the lap bar was no longer holding her. The coaster creates airtime by design. At the crest of a hill, riders experience brief weightlessness, a fraction of a second where the seat exerts no upward force. With a loose restraint, that fraction of a second is all it takes. On one steep descent, Rosie was ejected from the car. She fell approximately 75 feet, striking either a support structure or the ground below. The injuries were unsurvivable. Massive blunt force trauma, multiple fractures, fatal internal damage. Her son's row continued to the station. The seat behind him was empty. When the train returned, riders reported that a woman had been thrown from the ride. Staff found her body below the track. She was confirmed dead at the scene. The family's lawsuit alleged that the lap bar restraint was inadequate, that no secondary belt was in place, and that if Rosie had voiced concern before dispatch and the train had gone anyway, the failure was human as much as mechanical. Six Flags settled confidentially. Texas Giants trains were subsequently modified with redesigned restraints. The ride is still operating. The row she sat in has a different safety system now, the kind that might have kept her in her seat on July 19, 2013. Case 3. 4 people, 1 family ride. Thunder River Rapids at Dreamworld on Queensland's Gold Coast was not a thrill ride. It was a family attraction. Circular rafts, artificial rapids, a gentle enough experience that you'd bring your kids and think nothing of it. On October 25, 2016, 2 families arrived at Australia's most famous theme park for a day out. Cindy Lowe, 42, Kate Goodchild, 32, Luke Dorset, 35, and Rosie Aragi, 38, boarded a raft together and started what should have been a routine circuit. The ride used a conveyor belt system to lift rafts back to the loading platform at the end of each run. That day, a pump fault disrupted the water flow. An empty raft stalled on the conveyor near the top of the belt, sitting there, stuck, as the system continued to run. The occupied raft, carrying all 4 of them, came around the corner and collided with the stranded empty raft from behind. The impact caused the occupied raft to ride up over the empty one. It flipped. The conveyor machinery was still moving underneath. 2 of the 4 were thrown clear of the raft. 2 were dragged into the conveyor mechanism beneath the water. The machinery didn't stop. It wasn't designed to detect a person in the mechanism. There was no fail-safe that would shut everything down the moment a human body entered a space where no human body was supposed to be. The coroner later described the injuries sustained by those pulled into the mechanism as incompatible with life. For those thrown clear, the force of the collision and the fast-moving water caused injuries that were equally unsurvivable. All 4 were confirmed dead at the scene. Extraction from the machinery was described as difficult and traumatic for the rescue crews involved. The inquest that followed was devastating in its findings. The coroner condemned Dreamworld's safety systems as rudimentary and frighteningly unsophisticated, and stated the deaths were entirely preventable. There had been previous raft collisions and near misses on the same ride. Proper fail-safes, upgraded emergency stop controls, and meaningful hazard detection had not been implemented. The park had known about the risk profile of the ride and had not fixed it. Dreamworld's parent company pleaded guilty to safety breaches and was fined millions of dollars. Thunder River Rapids was permanently closed and eventually demolished. The coroner described the catastrophe as a failure at every level in the park's safety culture. 4 adults rode a family attraction at lunchtime and did not come home. Case 4. The Hat. On June 28, 2008, a 17-year-old visiting Six Flags Over Georgia in Austell was riding Batman, the ride with a church youth group from South Carolina. At some point during the ride, he lost his hat. It blew off or fell and ended up somewhere below the track in the area beneath the coaster circuit. When he got off the ride, he decided he wanted it back. Batman. The ride operates on a suspended track. Beneath the circuit is a maintenance corridor, a space used exclusively by trained technicians, accessed through fencing and barriers, with signage warning the public that the area is off-limits. The ride continues to run while the corridor below is used for maintenance, which means that anyone in that space when a train passes is in the path of a moving coaster at full operational speed. The teenager climbed over a 6-foot fence. He crossed into the restricted area. He then climbed a second barrier, higher still, which marked the boundary of the actual danger zone directly beneath the track. Both fences were clearly marked. Both were deliberately scaled. He went in looking for his hat, scanning the ground, focused downward. A train passed. The impact was instantaneous. A metal car or a rider's dangling leg struck him at operational speed. He was decapitated. Witnesses who saw it from outside the restricted area were left with a scene that emergency responders could do nothing about. The train completed its circuit. He was found beneath the track. Investigators found no fault with Six Flags. The fencing was in place. The signage was present. The ride was operating normally. The park had done what theme parks do, built barriers, posted warnings, and marked the danger zone clearly. The conclusion was straightforward. He had trespassed, twice, into a space that the park had gone to significant lengths to keep visitors out of, in order to retrieve a hat. The ride was closed briefly for investigation, and then reopened. The case has since been cited in safety discussions as a reminder of what fences are actually for, and of the fact that no barrier system can account for someone determined to climb over it. Case 5. The wiring in the water. Action Park in Vernon Township, New Jersey, had a reputation that arrived before you did. By the early 1980s, it was already known as the most injury-prone amusement park in the United States, a place where rides were built fast, safety was managed loosely, and guests were injured at a rate that would have shut down any other facility. It stayed open because people kept coming. The chaos was part of the appeal. The kayak experience was, by Action Park's standards, relatively benign. A man-made whitewater course, guests paddled small kayaks over artificial rapids created by underwater fan systems. The kayaks tipped constantly. Getting out to right the boat, to shove it off a rock, to wade through the current and climb back in, that was normal. Expected even. Staff didn't intervene unless someone was in genuine distress, which by Action Park's definition was a high bar. On August 1, 1982, Jeffrey Nathan, 27, was on the course when his kayak tipped, or became stuck. He stood up in the shallow, fast-moving water and stepped toward the metal grate covering the underwater fan system, the same grate that hundreds of riders had stood near or on without incident. Beneath that grate, electrical wiring had become exposed or failed. The insulation was compromised. The voltage was live. When Jeffrey stepped on or near the grate, the current surged through the water and into him. His muscles locked. He collapsed into the water and became unresponsive. Relatives who were nearby in the course felt the shock themselves, a clear indication of how much current was running through the water at that moment. Staff pulled him out and started CPR while the ride was shut down and drained. He was taken to hospital and pronounced dead. The cause was cardiac arrest induced by electric shock. The kayak experience was permanently closed. The death became one of at least 6 fatalities linked to Action Park over its operational life, a figure that, for an amusement park, is extraordinary. Exposed wiring in a water attraction is not a minor maintenance oversight. It is a fundamental structural failure. Action Park had built a ride that encouraged guests to get into the water near the infrastructure, as a matter of course, and had left live voltage running through the floor of it. Jeffrey Nathan didn't do anything that wasn't part of the experience. The experience was the problem. Case 6. The speed they don't tell you about. Universal's Epic Universe opened in Orlando, Florida in 2025 as one of the most anticipated theme park expansions in years. Stardust Racers was among its flagship coasters, a dual launch ride hitting speeds that the marketing described in terms designed to excite. On September 17, 2025, Kevin Rodriguez Zavala, 32, was at the park with his girlfriend. He boarded the ride. CCTV footage taken at dispatch shows him alert and responsive, restraints in place. Kevin had a medical history that was only going to become relevant after the fact. Previous leg and hip injuries, multiple surgeries, the kind of history that appears on the warning signs posted at the entrance to coasters, the signs that list conditions for which the ride is not recommended, recent surgeries, bone or joint conditions, anything that might affect how securely a person sits and stays seated through high G-forces. On the first major hill of the circuit, according to the investigation's final report, Kevin partially came out of his seat. His body shifted position under the forces of the ride. His head struck hard surfaces, parts of the restraint system or the interior of the train, multiple times. The medical examiner documented the damage: a deep laceration to the left side of his face, a fracture of the orbital rim, bleeding around the skull, a broken femur. By the time the train slowed into the station, he was slumped forward, unresponsive, bleeding. A doctor waiting in the ride queue saw him being removed from the train, arm hanging, leg visibly broken and twisted. Emergency services transported him to hospital. He was pronounced dead. Law enforcement classified the incident as an accident. Investigators concluded that park staff had followed procedures and that the ride and its restraints had functioned within design parameters. No criminal acts were identified. The ride was inspected and cleared. Kevin's girlfriend later suggested that his previous injury might have been the reason he was able to shift so far out of his seat during the ride. The warning signs were there at the entrance. Whether Kevin read them and understood them to apply to him specifically is a question that the investigation could not answer. What the medical examiner's report shows is what happens inside a high-speed coaster when a body isn't secured the way the engineering assumed it would be. Case 7. The fire they thought was part of the show. 6 Flags. Great Adventure in Jackson Township, New Jersey had a haunted castle. It was less a building than a collection of trailers dressed up and joined together to form a walk-through attraction. Plywood walls, foam props, darkness, disorientation, actors in costume, fake smoke. The kind of experience that works precisely because it's disorienting. You're supposed to be unsure what's real. On the night of May 11th, 1984, a group of teenagers were inside. 8 of them, roughly 15 to 20 years old, part of a larger crowd moving through the maze. At some point inside the attraction, a fire started, most likely from a lighter or ignition source contacting the foam or plywood interior. The materials used in the haunted castle were highly combustible. The fire found them immediately. The smoke came first. Thick, toxic, filling the corridors within seconds. For the guests already inside, the smoke looked like another effect. Sarte? Kind of atmospheric fog the attraction used throughout. People continued forward. By the time it was obvious the smoke was real, visibility had dropped to near zero, and the layout of the maze, deliberately confusing, full of dead ends and unexpected turns, made it nearly impossible to find a way out. The 8 teenagers did not get out. They died from smoke inhalation and burns inside the attraction. When firefighters entered the burned structure afterward, some initially mistook the charred remains for mannequins, the kind of prop the haunted castle used throughout. They were not mannequins. The investigation revealed what the fire had made so brutally obvious. The haunted castle had no sprinkler system, no smoke detectors. Emergency lighting was inadequate. Exit signage was insufficient for the deliberately disorienting layout. The reason for the absence of all of these things was a classification. The haunted castle was designated a temporary structure, which exempted it from the fire safety requirements that applied to permanent buildings, despite the fact that it had been operating for years and hosting thousands of visitors. Fire safety consultants had previously recommended that sprinklers and alarms be installed. They were not. Six Flags and certain executives faced aggravated manslaughter charges and were acquitted at trial. Civil settlements with the victims' families reached millions of dollars. The disaster changed building codes and enforcement standards for haunted attractions and temporary structures across multiple jurisdictions, mandating sprinklers and alarms in many states for the first time. Fire safety professionals cited the haunted castle for decades afterward as a tragedy waiting to happen. It had been waiting for years. Every one of these parks had safety systems: fences, warnings, restraints, inspection protocols, staff trained to follow procedures. And every one of these deaths happened anyway, because a lap bar wasn't properly checked, because wiring failed in a water ride, because a structure was exempt from fire codes on a technicality, because a slide was built by trial and error, and the error was never corrected in time. The thing that connects all 7 isn't incompetence or malice in every case. It's the gap between what a safety system is designed to do and what actually happens on a busy afternoon with 1,000 guests moving through. That gap is where people die. Which of these cases do you think could have been stopped most easily? What would it have taken? Let me know in the comments. If this video stayed with you, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories like these, and they're all worth knowing. Take care of yourselves.